Right now, I'm challenging myself to see if I can make 128 Regulation H teams that are each different from one another over the course of 128 days. Why 128, you might ask? At the end of the 128 days, we're going to do something special where we battle every team against each other in a single elimination bracket to see which team emerges on top. There will be some competitively strong teams, there will be some gimmick teams, and there will be some probably a good number of goofs and gaffs in there, so if you want to follow through to the end, subscribe so that you can keep up with each day. But without further ado, let's move on to day 65. Alright everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we are going to be going over a sword team. Now sword teams got noticeably better in Generation 9, not only because they added the 3 Paradox Swords of Justices for whenever we're in higher power formats, but they also added a new ability to the game, which flat out gives a Mega Launcher boost for cutting moves called Sharpness, and we've gone over Sharpness quite a few times before, but the ability for slicing moves to receive a 1.5 times boost is absolutely insane when you consider that a lot more of the cutting moves are higher base power than like the pulse moves, which is the other ability that's very similar to Sharpness. Like Water Pulse is like 60 base power and Sacred Sword is like 90 base power, so there is a drastic difference there. But let's delve into some of these Pokemon a little bit more specifically. As with Gallade, as we just mentioned, we have the Stab Sacred Sword, but we also have the Psycho Cut option just for good damage, and the Leaf Blade gives us a little bit of surprise damage, and we have a high critical hit ratio, so in case we need to like hit a Dondozo or something, Gallade can probably take like a non-Wave Crash hit from a Dondozo and try and get 2 Leaf Blades in, which can solve our Dondozo problem. But we also do have the Skill Swap for getting rid of the opponent's abilities that are good for them. We can give them Sharpness, which more often than not will just end up being a useless ability, or we can skill swap Sharpness onto our own Pokemon that do not currently have a Sharpness, as the only Pokemon on this team that has Sharpness is the Hisuian Samurott, and Mousehold, Lurantis, and Salamence all benefit from getting the Sharpness. And with Triceratops, we're super speedy and we can outspeed all the other Pokemon on the field with our skill swap in case we need to get rid of an ability fairly quickly, and we're Terra Ghost just so that we're not getting faked out. Next up, we have Mousehold, and as you wouldn't probably believe me if I told you, but Population Bomb is actually a cutting move. I believe it's actually like a pun in Japanese that has to do with more like a population spike kind of thing. But since Population Bomb is a cutting move, we can skill swap the Sharpness onto Mousehold, and Mousehold does have the Technician, which would do the same thing because Population Bomb is less than 60 base power. However, this allows us to run Mousehold as more of a supportive set, as we do have the Charm for lowering the opponent's attack, and we have the Fake Tears for lowering the opponent's special defense, or we could side Fake Tears into Lurantis since Lurantis is contrary in order to give it an attack buff or a special defense buff. And since we don't have to run Technician, we can afford to run Friend Guard, which is a pretty nice ability for support Pokemon, and we're Wide Lens so that we're hopefully not missing any of our Population Bombs to make them 99% accurate, and we're Terra Normal to further boost the power of our Population Bombs. So we're kind of running a half and half Mousehold here, where it's half support in its ability and some of its moves, and it's offensive and its item, it's Terra, and it's Population Bomb. Up next, we got Hisuian Samurott, and Hisuian Samurott is just a super stable Sharpness Pokemon, especially in this format where the power level is a little lower, and there isn't Flare Mane in order to prey on it. But on our Hisuian Samurott, we are going to be running the Stab, Razor Shell, Night Slash, and Sucker Punch, with the Razor Shell and Night Slash being boosted by our Sharpness, and we have the Sacred Sword just because, again, it is a very high base power move that allows us to ignore all the stat changes of the opponent whenever we're doing damage, and it's just good type coverage to have on our Hisuian Samurott. As well as Hisuian Samurott is running the Assault Vest so that we can hopefully take special hits with the Hisuian Samurott, and we're Terra Fairy just because Fairy gives us some nice resistances. Up next, we have the Lurantis, and as I mentioned before, Lurantis is a contrary Pokemon, which means that whenever Lurantis has stat changes, they will be opposite of the way that they normally work. So instead of Intimidate decreasing our attack, we will have an increase in attack with Lurantis, but Lurantis is one of these slower contrary mons, which kind of works to its not benefit. We have to run Lurantis a little bit more tanky, and we do have the superpower, which is a super strong fighting type move that will increase our attack and defense every time we use it. And as I mentioned before, on Mousehold we have the Fake Tears in order to increase our special defense, and with the Friend Guard from Mousehold, Lurantis can be kind of tricky to take off the field sometimes, especially since we have that good Stab Leaf Blade for our grass type damage, and we also have the Leech Life tacked on, which will give us 50% of our health back, and not many people expect bug type moves these days since bug type moves aren't all that common. But also to give us a little bit more survivability while we're getting set up with the Lurantis, we have the Citrus Berry just to restore a fourth of our health, and Terrifier is really nice for giving us resistances, but it also means that we can't be burned on the Lurantis. Up next we have Salamence, and I decided to make this Salamence a special attacker set, putting it all into speed and special attack, and we have the Draco Meteor just to get off that one really strong hit of dragon type damage, and Air Slash is a slashing move, so it does get powered up by the sharpness, so we can just have really strong flying type damage Salamence if we lead Gallade and decide to just put the sharpness onto Salamence. And since we're skill swapping Intimidate, we are going to be able to double Intimidate the opponent with our Gallade to even further reduce the power of their physical attacks. And lastly, on Salamence, I decided to put on Heat Wave just for a little bit of type coverage, and to further boost our damage, we are going to be using the Life Orb item. And we're also Terrifier again, just because fire, it makes Salamence not super weak to ice, and the stab fire on Heat Wave is nice. And lastly on this team, I decided to slat on Raichu, so that unfortunately Raichu doesn't have any sword, except actually maybe you get cut on Raichu. No, you do not get cut on, actually cut might not be in the game anymore. This is a side tangent, don't worry about it. But the reason that we have Raichu here is because I wanted a really fast fake out Pokemon in order to help out some of our other setup Pokemon who really just need to get off one turn of damage maybe to try and 2-KO another Pokemon. But we also have the Tickle, which will lower the target's attack and defense, so we can side Tickle into Lurantis in order to increase its damage and decrease the damage that it takes from physical attacks, but we can also use it into the opponent in order to decrease their defense, but also decrease the damage that they are giving into us. And for Raichu, we also have the ability to pivot with the Volt Switch, and we are Focus Sash, so I decided to slot on the Endeavor, which can really help us take out Pokemon sometimes whenever Raichu goes all the way down on its health. Then we can Endeavor the opponent into having only 1 health, and then Samrock can maybe Sucker Punch them off, or Gallade can take them out with super fast Gallade. We are Lightning Rod on the Raichu, maybe just to pressure the opponent into not clicking electric type moves, as we have the ability to swap in Raichu in order to negate them, and we're just Terra Electric just for a little bit of electric boost, but you really don't want to be terroring Raichu that often. But yeah, that's the basic gist of the team. Let's get into some battles. Alright, so in this first battle, they have Duraludon, who is really tanky, but we do have a good number of good fighting type damages on this team, so I'm not too concerned about it. The most concerning thing on this team, I think, is actually the Alolan Ninetales, just because it outspeeds a good amount of our team, because we have Mousehold currently trained to be not max speed, so that it can work with Raichu better, so I think it actually speed ties with max speed Alolan Ninetales, but the Gliscor and the Toxapex can also be pretty stally here, and I'm not quite sure how we handle stall at this point. They decide to lead Gliscor and the Alolan Ninetales as we get to lead Samurott and Gallade here. Ninetales sets the snow, and I decide to skill swap into the Gliscor in order to get rid of its poison heal as they decide to get fully set up, but we immediately crit the Ninetales, which is pretty nice for us as the get up their Aurora Veil and their Tailwind here, so if they manage to exert a lot of fast pressure against us, things might go kind of south, but we've gotten our one really good turn of damage here where we hit the Alolan Ninetales. Of course, the Gliscor thankfully is Poison Orb, so it gets poisoned, and we get to swap a Mousehold here for the Friend Guard into Samurott, and Samurott absolutely tanks that Moonblast, and Mousehold tanks the dual Wing Beat since it is not a fighting type, and we get to pick off Ninetales there as Gliscor is taking the poison type damage, and the Toxapex actually reveals Baneful Bunker as they get to dueling beat the Mousehold here in order to get rid of it. But we get really nice Razor Shell damage into the Gliscor, and we get another defense drop, but the defense drop doesn't matter too much here as we just Sucker Punch away the Gliscor. It would have died from poison damage at the end of the turn, and we get a superpower into the Toxapex in order to start increasing Lurantis' damage as Toxapex Toxics into Samurott, perhaps to be a little bit too stally here. Draco Meteor comes out from Duraludon, but it thankfully does not KO Lurantis, and Lurantis gets to eat a Citrus Berry, meaning that we would survive another one, but the superpower is going to finish off the Duraludon here. And as the poison damage ticks away on Samurott, I tried to just protect again since I didn't want to attack Toxapex yet. I wanted to wait to see if we can maybe get Gallade to start dealing damage into this thing before we commit to Lurantis being poisoned by the Baneful Bunker, but we're just clicking protect over and over again because I don't want to attack it on the Baneful Bunker turns. And we do get the Psycho Cut into the Toxic Pex, and we get to Leaf Blade into it for a lot of damage. And they Toxic into us, and they're healing with their Black Sludge, but at this point, the poison damage is not stacking up enough, and we can just Psycho Cut with Gallade super safely, unless there were like a super strange Terra on the Toxapex, like Dark Terra or something. But Psycho Cut gets to pick off Toxapex here, thankfully. Here we have a bit of a Trick Room setup, and I think our team actually plays really well into Trick Room, just because the only thing that they can really use to touch Lurantis on this team are like the Guldango, who's still going to take a lot of damage from everything else on this team, and the Flamigo, who's a fairly frail component. But we lead Lurantis and Salamence here, and they lead Porygon 2 and Amoonguss, which I am perfectly okay with. It's Porygon 2 negates the Intimidate with its download, and we missed the Heat Wave to start off with on Salamence, which is not great, but we get the Superpower into Porygon 2 for a lot of damage, and they do Spore into Salamence in order to put it to sleep, and Porygon 2 sets up the Trick Room. Amoonguss decides to Rage Powder though, which is maybe not the greatest thing for them, as the Grass-type Lurantis is going to ignore the Rage Powder, and now they bring in Ursaluna, who's we're not super afraid of because they don't have their guts right now. And maybe they expected a switch there, but we full on get to Superpower into Ursaluna again as they headlong rush into Lurantis. And now we have Raichu on the field who can get a Fake Out into Amoonguss here, but the opponent just decides to hard quit off of those few turns that we had there. We just got Lurantis to be set up to be unbeatable at this point. We got a pretty interesting team as they have 2 grass starters, but also 2 fire starters, which kind of reads to me that they might want to do like pledge move things. But their 2 supports in Clefable and Murkrow kind of make this game a little bit more difficult, because Murkrow could like haze away all of our boosts for Lurantis, and Clefable can just redirect pretty much everything on this team, since we mostly have single target attacks except for like Salamence, who has the Heat Wave. The game starts out, we get Gallade and Lurantis in, and they decide to leave Meowscarada and Rillaboom, which is good for us as long as they decide to fake out Lurantis. So we protect Lurantis here, we do get the call right, and we full on just get to Sacred Sword into Meowscarada, and Meowscarada thankfully is not Focus Sash, so they are bringing in Incineroar here, which gives Lurantis an attack boost, and now we can just Terra Fire Lurantis, my bad. We can Terra Fire Lurantis in order to start getting off hits, and we Sacred Sword Incineroar for a ton of damage, and Lurantis is, of course, faked out this turn, so it doesn't get to do anything. But now we get to bring in Salamence in order to double intimidate the opponent, as they decided to Terra Ghost their Incineroar. But I read that this might happen, or that the Incineroar might switch out into Skeledirge, so I just decided to Superpower into the Rillaboom, so that way we can get our guaranteed defense boost there and do good damage into Rillaboom. And now they do decide to swap into Skeledirge, but we air slashed into Rillaboom there and just did a little bit of Leaf Blade into what was previously Incineroar. But the Skeledirge is most likely unaware, so it's ignoring our Lurantis boosts. Now they get to bring Incineroar back in, but that gives us another attack boost on the Lurantis, and we don't really need Raichu at this point, so I just decided to swap out Salamence for a future Intimidate on the Incineroar, and they try yawning and fake outing into Lurantis, but Lurantis just gets to protect and enjoy the grassy terrain healing, and the opponent forfeits. So what I was planning to do in this endgame was to pick off the Incineroar using the Lurantis, and then like maybe use Raichu to Volt Switch out into Gallade, so that Gallade could skill swap away the Unaware on Skeledirge and then put the Unaware on Lurantis. So even if the Skeledirge endgame where we probably still have Raichu and Salamence in the back in order to take Skeledirge, but we could just use our boost against the Skeledirge with our like Leaf Blade, and it would probably do like a bunch of damage. Here we have like a pretty standard team that tends to do well at tournaments, where it's like the Double Dragon and Garchomp and Dragonite, and the Alolan Ninetales and Amoonguss and Incineroar are all there to support all these pretty heavy damage components. So we lead Raichu and Hisuian Samurott to maybe try and do some damage here, but they lead Ninetales, which is a little unfortunate. I was really hoping that they would start something like the Incineroar and the Garchomp, just so that we could start like faking out the Incineroar and then dealing damage into Garchomp. But they do immediately swamp Incineroar in, which seems a little bit risky considering I could have just Razor Shelled into the Garchomp slot. But we get fake out into Alolan Ninetales at least this turn, and we do Razor Shell into Ninetales, so we don't get off a lot of damage this turn. And they decide to fake out into Samurott, and we tickle Ninetales in order to increase the damage that we can do to it in future turns. And Samurott takes the Freeze Drive pretty well as we tickle Incineroar 2 in order to decrease its attack. and we take the freeze dry and we get the Rager Cell into Ninetales, but unfortunately it's not enough to KO it. But Incineroar has close combat, which is decided to use into Samurai here, but now we can bring in Lurantis in order to start stacking damage on Lurantis, and we get the Volt Switch into Ninetales, taking it out, and we Terra-Fired Lurantis so that it's not getting a lot of damage from Flare Blitz, but maybe that's a little bit of an unnecessary Terra there, considering that we just, like, stacked so many multipliers against the Incineroar there that we could have taken the Flare Blitz pretty well. But they reveal that they have Amoonguss and Garchomp in the back, and they immediately Terra the Amoonguss, and we just Heat Waved with the Salamence because I wanted to try and get damage into Amoonguss, but also Burn on Garchomp really helps us here. But they reveal they actually have Clear Smog on Amoonguss, and Dragon Claw, unfortunately, is just going to take out the Salamence here, and we try to get as much Leaf Blade damage into Amoonguss as possible, but Amoonguss takes it, and it has a berry to heal itself back up, and then Clear Smog Lurantis, so things aren't looking great here as we bring Raichu back to the field, and Garchomp protects, not wanting to get faked out, but we side tickle Lurantis here in order to deal with the Amoonguss and take it out, and we tickle Lurantis again in order to try and take the Earthquake here, but the Earthquake does a bit. We get the Citrus Berry at least, but we try Leaf Blading into Garchomp in order to take it out, but unfortunately that doesn't take it out, and Garchomp protects again. And I tried tickling into Garchomp in order to reduce the damage that we're taking this turn. But on the previous turn, if I thought the Leaf Blade wasn't going to KO, I should have gone for the Leech Life with Lurantis, because it wouldn't be stab, but it would at least heal us the damage that we took in order to negate the damage that we just took from the Rough Skin. I think the opponent's kind of throwing a little bit here, because if you're going to attack again, like, I would just side tickle into Lurantis again in order to get another defense boost, but unfortunately, we do get the tickle into Garchomp here, but Lurantis actually gets knocked out by the Earthquake, which is not what I was expecting to happen. But I also had another guaranteed endgame here if I just protected with Lurantis instead of going for an attack that turn. Since Garchomp Earthquaked, it would have taken out Raichu, and then it would have taken out the Life Orb damage on the Garchomp to pull it low enough to get knocked out, so I 100% messed up that endgame there. Here we have a pretty good variety of Mons. They have Incineroar, which is their most common piece, but like Glimmora can like really threaten a Meteor Beam into us, and if they get speed control in any way with like Braviary going for the Tailwind, then things can get out of hand like really quickly with this team, because there's a lot of Pokemon that add a lot of variance here, especially like Cloyster with the Shell Smash. And the fact that they're not running Sun on this team also tells me that they are probably Serene Grace Sawsbuck, and Serene Grace Sawsbuck can really throw a wrench into your plans. We get to lead Lurantis and Gallade here as the opponent sends out the Glimmora and the Incineroar. I do get the attack boost on Lurantis, and I decide to make a bit of a risky play here where we just Psycho Cut with Gallade, but fortunately that play works out where we just get to take out the Glimmora in one hit with the crit, and I'm not certain, but I feel like even if it wasn't a crit there, we could have taken the Glimmora out in 2 hits, so it depends on what the Glimmora does here, if it decides to Meteor Beam into Lurantis, or maybe try to Sludge Bomb into Lurantis, we would catch both of those plays, but if they tried to like Meteor Beam into Gallade, things would get like kind of noticeably worse here. But we get to take out Gallade first turn, which is nice, but now they get to bring in Cloyster for free, so I decided to swap out Maushold so that we can have a Sacred Sword for Cloyster later. But Cloyster immediately goes Terra Flying and then decides to go for their Shell Smash and their White Herb, and the Flare Blitz full on KOs Lurantis, which I was not expecting because I thought Lurantis would at least take it once we had Maushold's Friend Guard up, but no, Lurantis just full on gets clapped by the Flare Blitz. This allows us to bring in Salamence, so we at least get an Intimidate down on the Cloyster, and I decide to Terra Normal the Maushold here, as I predict they're going to attack Salamence, and they do attack into Salamence, so we get a Population Bomb into Cloyster, but the Population Bombs are doing just barely not enough to be at 10%. Some of them are doing 10%, but we would need a crit here in order to KO the Cloyster, but Cloyster lives on 6% this turn, as Incineroar goes for the U-turn into Sawsbuck, and they get to Icicle Spear down the Salamence here, as I attacked with both so that we could at least get rid of Cloyster this turn, and Sawsbuck goes for the Body Slam, and thankfully we do not get paralyzed on the Maushold, as now we can bring in the Gallade, and now that I look at, actually it doesn't matter if we get paralyzed on Maushold here, because they faked out into Maushold, sure, but the Sacred Sword just clean KOs Sawsbuck there, and it also just clean KOs Incineroar, so the fact that they didn't use Incineroar to attack Gallade means that the para on Maushold there wouldn't have even mattered. And lastly, we have a Ninetales Snow team, but this one is a little bit more mischievous as they have the Hisuian Zoroark, But it is kind of worth noting that Hisui and Zoroark can only really hide as 2 pieces on this team, as like the Metagross or the Dragonite, because both the Indeedee and the Ninetales will have their ability activated the turn that they enter the field, and if we just double protect, we can see if a Pokemon is Blaziken or not on this team. The battle starts and they decide to lead Ninetales and Dragonite, so it's fully possible that they could be leading Hisui and Zoroark here. And we decide to Terra Fire Lurantis here in order to side Fake Tears into it to increase its special defense, so just in case it was Zoroark, we can take a hit. And they do freeze Mousehold here, but they also Scale Shot into it in order to take it out, so we at least get to know that this is Dragonite and this is Ninetales guaranteed this turn. We superpower Ninetales for a decent chunk of damage, but it does have the Snow Boost right now, so it's not a lot of damage. And we Psycho Cut Dragonite, but that Dragonite is definitely multi-scale because it took pretty much no damage while having a defense drop. And the Dragonite is Haze, so it got rid of our attack boost and its defense drop there, but we keep Psycho Cutting into Dragonite as Ninetales goes for the Moonblast, and thankfully we dodged the Scale Shot there as we get some needed damage into the Ninetales, and because Gallade dodged the Scale Shot, we get to Psycho Cut down Dragonite as Ninetales just protects this turn, but it's also stalling out its own Aurora Veil, as now the Indeedee is going to come in, and it doesn't redirect, it maybe tries to go for something crazy here. Oh, it goes for Dazzling Gleam, but we get to Psycho Cut down the Ninetales, and we get to Leech Life into Indeedee in order to take a lot of its health off of it, and they reveal Metagross as their last Pokemon, so even if Gallade did go down here, I feel pretty comfortable that Lurantis would always have this endgame, as the Stomping Tantrum on Metagross just doesn't do that much, even though it's super effective right now. But the Aurora Veil wears off, and I am fine just trying to attack with Gallade, as they tried Bullet Punching, but they don't understand how their own Psychic Terrain works, so Gallade just gets to double Psycho Cut into Metagross in order to take it out. So yeah, that was the We've All Got Swords team. And obviously I think it's more fun to run these pieces individually, but they all do work together kind of well. Because Gallade, Mousehold, and Samurai are like all weak to the Intimidate, but Lurantis absolutely loves the Intimidate. And it was also kind of fun to use like the mixed Mousehold set where it's like half attack, half support Mousehold, especially I love using the side contrary moves into Lurantis. It's just so much fun, one of my favorite strategies. But thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video and even consider subscribing, because both of those things help me out an absolute ton. And I will see you in the next one. Thank you.